So glad you could join us this morning, Louise. First of all, we wanted to offer condolences on the sad passing of your close friend, Baroness Margaret McDonough, and we'd ask you to pass on our condolences to her family, and it's the primary reason why you can't join us today. In relation to the report now, it's some 3 months or so since you published this seminal report looking at the Sarah Everard case and the Metropolitan Police working culture. I just wonder, because it's the first time you've actually done something on race, whether you were surprised or how did you navigate the response to the report? Because you've done so many, I just wondered whether you noticed anything particular around the race issue as compared to many of the other issues.
So I suppose I've spent more of my life doing rather than reviewing, actually. Yeah. So, and the integration and opportunity review that I did sort of at the tail end of Cameron and then Theresa May did look at the changing dynamics of the United Kingdom and tried very gently, unlike my usual way of doing things, did try really gently to say, look, the country is changing and it's changing in many ways, and some of the structures around that aren't changing at the same pace. And I thought that was quite a sort of gentle way of saying, you know, some cities are now sort of more black than white, of which London is now one of them, and that really society has to keep up with that change, embrace it, and, you know, see how we all live and work together on one island. I think, though, that the Met Review, I mean, it's hard to put into words, really, just the extraordinary searing issue of race, among many other kind of issues and challenges and problems within the Metropolitan Police. But it is a standout issue, and one that I had hoped and thought might have been better addressed since Macpherson. And therefore, I think because somebody else before you, in a very different way, the Macpherson inquiry was a sort of judge-led inquiry, it wasn't a review. But nevertheless, it found institutional racism in the Met Police, explained what that was, and one would have hoped that there would have been more progress really against that, and there hasn't been.
Do you think if there had been more progress in implementing that and keeping to the Lawrence recommendations, we would be where we are today now? For instance, reflections on a sixth Lawrence murderer, popping out the woodwork some 30 years on and 15 investigations later.
Well, I think the thing I find kind of really important to say, particularly to you and to this conference, is that the sixth perpetrator was identified largely and brought to light by an extensive investigative journalism operation by the BBC. And if that journalist hadn't had the time and capacity gifted to him by the BBC, a journalist that, isn't some lead person that stands on the news every night like Mark and others, Mr. Easton and others, but somebody that's, drilling into the weeds, it is troubling, is it not, that actually it is the media and potentially other organisations like your own that are actually trying to sort of make things more transparent, make things more open, and bring these issues into the public light, and therefore more accountable. And I think that is one of the things I found in the review, within many other things, is that there has to be a greater transparency and accountability from the Metropolitan Police, not only to a new policing board that I'm sure we'll come to, chaired by Sadiq Khan and will be chaired by the Mayor, but also on a borough-by-borough basis, where actually the borough commanders, as they're called, need to be able to be accountable for all the policing that happens on their watch and on their patch, and they're not.
Right.
So there's a sort of like macro, why does it take the BBC to essentially investigate and bring this to light rather than the Met or other sort of policing organisations? So accountability is a big issue. And then secondly, in the review that I did, I think it's patently clear to me that, you know, boroughs or local authorities or communities, whichever work, that people living in geographical areas are not the police who are supposed to be responsible for those areas aren't. I also asked myself about David Carrick,
yes,
the multiple torturer and rapist.
yes.
And, you know, this is where, and again, I'm sure we'll come to it, this is where it's really important that organisations and institutions realise that sometimes it may not be the individual decisions made by their staff or officers in the cases or the loads that they're taking, but actually sometimes you have to look at the overall system not being effective. Now, I'll come back to Baroness Doreen Lawrence and the just extraordinary treatment of her and the whole family over 30 years, 3 decades. You know, when that story came out, and actually Mark Easton from the BBC got in touch with me and told me about it, which was really good of him, I just went to Doreen in my head and thought, how much more can this family take? And why, you know, you've got Mina Smallman speaking at the conference alongside us, and that sense really that somewhere in there is the issue because their skin colour is black, and it's not white, and you can't not see that.
No, absolutely.
You know, and I say that as somebody that is very looking for weighty evidence. I'm looking for, you know, deep evidence. My job is to not take a soundbite or look for an anecdote or get too emotionally involved. You know, you have to be really clear and really, really balanced. But, you know, finding the 6th perpetrator, your head goes immediately to the Lawrence family and essentially like, what is that actually about? And is it about the fact that you're tired of it, you don't want to use the word racism, you don't like it very much, and so you just move on, and it's not acceptable.
It's not. And it's indicative, I think, of a culture in the Met that pertains and still exists, and which Mark Rowley has got a gargantuan task in seeking to change around. I just wondered if you were aware of how broadly in the black community your report has been received, and people thinking, you know, our complaint, our articulation, our struggle with the Met to achieve an anti-racist police service has further been reinforced by the findings of your giving credence to a critique that the black community has had for 30 odd years. You know, I love you dearly, but it takes a white person to say the things that we've been saying and not being heard in order to have some degree of traction. And I just wondered whether you were aware of that and what you thought about the reaction to your report subsequently.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You know, it's sad it takes a white person. That says something in itself. And I supposedly, I didn't go in, I mean, I went into the Met on Sarah essentially Everard, the Sarah Everard's murderer. And I think that they thought that, I quote, "You won't find so many issues around race." But, you know, we think there is potentially some issues around misogyny.
Yeah.
And what became really clear as well, and sorry, can I just go back to that last question about institutional connection? So you asked me, the thing that I find so interesting is that as an institution, it didn't look to see what the connections were in the run-up to David Carrick.
Yeah.
So they don't look for, in the same you and I would, most organisations, something comes up on your radar, you know, a potential misconduct issue. You look at that, but you would also look at them and see, do they have any other infractions that have happened over time? Because this is employment.
This is basic policing practice.
This isn't, and they don't. And actually, I think that speaks to institutional failure and not wanting to find the truth, to move on quickly. And that's what's happened in relation to, the earlier question around the Lawrence case, is it gets into a kind of, we've closed that down, we want to move on. And I think in many ways in some ways, that's what I've been grappling with to answer your question about what's it been like since publication. And at the time of publication, what I said to them, and it's clear in the report, which is, can you just take a moment to let this seep into your actual brains and your psyche, into the body of your organisation? Have you given every single police officer that is in your organisation the opportunity to reflect on what I have found in them and in their organisation? Both the people that got in touch to say, thank God somebody has finally said all of what I said, not only the institutional racism issue, but actually their voices they felt were really reflected in that report. And yet, very, very quickly, in my view, that sort of Met does what it always does, which is job done, we'll move on. And it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because if they said, look, we're just going to take some time out and think about it, we'd all be going, well, what the hell are they doing to sort themselves out?
I don't think I would, to be fair.
Well,
I'd hold
some
back.
people might.
Some people would. I get that.
But I felt that I had gifted them
an
opportunity to sort of take breath. And we'll see, because they're publishing actually in the same week that next week you're having the conference, their next iteration of their turnaround plan. So we'll see how much they have allowed what, was a 14-month review to 382 pages of weighty evidence. Let's see whether that has seeped into the body politic of the organisation.
Well, we'll see. We meet with the Met around their turnaround plan, and one of the first criticisms we had on the first iteration, it wasn't strategically linked to the National Police Police Chiefs Council's Race Equality Plan. It wasn't really linked to the Mayor's Action Plan. And we were saying, OK, we're having 3 separate discussions with 3 separate organisations about race equality action plans and policing. You're clearly not talking to each other. No strategies is integrated and builds on the other. And so a failure to join up the dots, not just in investigation, but actually in senior management processes.
When the Charing Cross inquiry, the thing came out of the IOPC, Independent Office for Police Conduct, it was pretty horrific.
It was indeed. The WhatsApp. Here we talk about the WhatsApp
groups. The WhatsApp group and the report that the then London director did bravely.
Yeah.
And I think it was a sort of moment really for the mayor when he thought, dear God, it's like, we cannot carry on like this. I'm told all the time that things are improving, things are being taken seriously, all of this stuff is moving in the right direction. And then to realise that had happened, and relatively recently, because that's the other thing I feel about my review, is I've picked up that people, she used historic cases. No, I didn't use historic cases. I deliberately did not use historic cases, so nobody could say it's all sorted out.
Yeah.
And so I think there is this moment, isn't there, as well, that the evidence tells us that black communities have had very little faith and trust and confidence in the police for a long time, and that has got even worse than before in the last few years. And what now runs alongside that is women.
Absolutely.
So what you now have is actually women and black and minority ethnic communities together not having trust, faith, confidence in the police. And
the majority of London, as if we had
now takes
lesbian and gay and trans LGBTQ+.
Well, and you look, I take it entirely that the Ipsos Mori work that we did is a moment in time.
Yep.
But I did it towards the end of the review. We did it deliberately after we, got our sort of getting our sense of where we were.
Yeah.
And I wanted a live sense check during the course of the review to tell us where London is. And what it told us is less people in London have confidence, trust, faith in the police to police them than the other way around.
Yeah.
So it's dropped to a minority.
Yeah.
And then within that, you see very, very clear, huge differences, disparity between white Londoners and white male Londoners in particular. I mean, there was one moment where, I don't think I put this in the review because I thought it was too much of a soundbite, and we'd lose some of the bigger issues. But essentially, it is white male Londoners that earn over £100,000 a year. If you drill into the micro detail of the survey work, it is literally them that still have trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police. And doesn't that say something, really? And so of course, then that takes me to, this is not the first time I've been concerned about police and faith. I did loads of work around antisocial behaviour in the early 2000s, and I've been in and around the Home Office policy for a long time. But when you're public, when less of your public consent to be policed by you, I think you have a huge siren going on.
Is that recognised by the Met?
And I will wait and see what they put in there. It wasn't at the time we published. So it wasn't only a sort of, we can't use a label and of institutional racism. We can't. And you think, look, guys, it's not a label. It's not, I'm not in a shop putting a label on. I am describing what the evidence tells me. It's a description of where your institution
Your objective reality, yeah.
It's the objective reality. Whether you look at the issue of discrimination, and within discrimination we have misogyny and sexism, we have homophobia, we have bullying. 22% of officers in the Met have personally experienced bullying, and that goes up much higher when you're a woman or black or minority ethnic Londoner or non-Londoner if you're a police officer. And yet we put so clearly the issue of institutional, systemic, organisational, whichever way you use those words, it is something within the body of the organisation that needs to be challenged and changed. And if you don't accept that, then you can't move on. So I think it's really easy for white people to say, I'm anti-racist. I went to some public sector thing somewhere else in the country not that long ago, and they were like, we're gonna be anti-racist. And it's really easy to have a strap line, you know, Louise Casey, you know, Finsbury Park, I'm anti-racist. That's the easy thing to say and do. It is much more difficult to accept that you have flaws and failings, both personally and as an institution. And if you don't accept those flaws and failures and see them in the mirror when it is put up to you, and that mirror that we did in the review was their officers, their staff, their Londoners. I didn't pluck institutional racism out of the air, dust down Macpherson and put it in my report. I was very, very careful to be absolutely sure that that was right. And if I hadn't found it, Lee, I would have said I haven't found it. And I would have taken all of the flack for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's the objective thing to do. I have to do. Absolutely. That's my moral responsibility to actually reflect what I think the truth is. And I would have done that and faced down many of the people that I know and have worked with who aren't white over many decades. And I'd have done it if I thought that was right. But the evidence takes you there. And it is a really thorough piece of work.
And can we just say, I mean, your report was in-depth, forensic, deliberative and methodical. This is not a sort of, you know, half-an-hour desktop research exercise. You spoke to people, you took evidence, you listened to people, and as you say, all of the objective evidence contained in the report, you know, comes from the Met officers or the Met data. And so...
Yeah, so for the misconduct work, we looked at 19,000 data sets, extraordinary woman in the team, absolutely extraordinary. So we looked at every single available set of data on misconduct, individual allegations, badge numbers, the lot, since 2013. And the Met have never done that. The Met have never done that.
Wow.
So we were able to establish the patterns of people that were have been done for misconduct.
Disproportionately disciplined.
Both ways.
Yeah.
So the David Carricks, who travelled through that system untouched. Yeah. And then we were very clear to look at the issue of race in there.
Which is particularly striking.
Well, I was shocked by that.
You were.
I was.
The experience of black officers.
The 81%. So if your skin colour is black, you are 81% more likely to be the subject of a misconduct complaint. I mean, I was like, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. For me, I am very clear that the black community, as it's referred to, as if it's one
and it isn't.
Homogenous
Absolutely.
group. Always,
communities.
Right, and when people say the community, so it was really interesting. I realised quite early on that when people use the word, the expression, well, we've got to see what the community think. I was thinking, you're talking about black people, aren't you? I'm just like, are they talking about black people?
We're the only community here.
Are we sure? Do we all know what? And I look across the table and I said, so you're talking about black people, aren't you? They go, yes, we are. You see, this is why I sort of think that I very deliberetely said there are sort of 4 tests that you could put in place. So this worry that the Met has, or had, or has, we'll see, about sort of the institutional racism label we'll never get rid of. And you sort of think, so I thought, okay, so what we'll do then is we'll describe 4 different ways that you could cut this. Yeah. So that in 2.5 years from now, or 2 years from now, were somebody like me to come back in, or they themselves, they're bored, the Mayor's new policing board for London, you can look, therefore, you could go back and put indicators against those 4. So, sorry, to therefore show that you're moving in a different direction. And so it's not a label that you're stuck with, it's a description of your organisation with some very clear goals that you could measure your way towards. So I felt I really helped them, not just by saying I agree with them first, and also
you provided them with an elegant solution.
Very elegant solution.
If I may say so.
Diplomacy has never been my strength, but I did try and get to that place. And then just your thing about kind of sort of the disparity and apartheid. I think that do you have within your institution people that are racist and that we know that they are racist or misogynist or homophobic? So, I get it really clear, it's a discrimination. But you have to name with it. You can't just say, I accept we're discriminatory. Yeah. You have to then own it, because there's a very different approach to dealing with somebody, an institution or an individual that is racist. Yeah. I must admit, I always say people don't wake up, on the whole, bad people don't wake up thinking today I'll be a racist, tomorrow I'll be a sexist git and a misogynist, and by Friday I'll, be a homophobe. On the whole, a lot of it comes together as a set of behaviours, but you have to work out the differences because they are different. And so just saying I accept discrimination won't be enough for me. You have to accept what you are. And so what you have then is you work through it, racists or misogynists in your organisation, that the way that you treat people in your organisation around bullying, you can measure. Then you get to institutional, and we've given it to them. We've given misconduct to them really clearly. But I would say there are issues around recruitment that we explore in the report, where again, I think you can see signs of institutional discrimination. And then we get to the treatment of Londoners. And the treatment of Londoners who are black is appalling. And the evidence tells us that. It's not my view.
And it's not my view.
Brixton Police Station.
I want to push you on that.
It's the disproportionate use of force.
You're convinced there's clear evidence we are treated appallingly. by the Met.
Well, the evidence in the report is really clear about the disproportionate use of force and enforcement tools on black Londoners and on black young Londoners in particular. And my worry about the young Londoners is that they will then seed it onto their children. So, you know, there are, I don't know, 8 million of us that live in London. I don't have children, Lee. If I had children and they were white children, I wouldn't, when they were 10, 11 years of age, be sitting down with them and saying...
Having the talk.
Having the talk, capital T, capital T.
Yeah.
I don't think most white people understand. They don't do it, number one. And number two, they don't know that that's what happens.
Yeah.
In every black and minority ethnic community in London, a parent will sit down with their child and talk them through how to deal with the police.
Absolutely.
And I don't think the police actually understand that that's what has to go on. Some of them do, some of them are, you know, absolutely fantastic. But as an organisation, and actually as white people living in London, living in this country, do we realise that's what black families have to do?
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. I find what the report has brought to us is an opportunity to build alliances between women's groups, LGBT groups, disabled groups, everybody who's been treated less well, less professionally by the Met. And part of the way that we've done the conference is to make sure that the black community is represented in the hall. So we have Black Pride, we have black people with disabilities who will talk about the hate crime they suffer, black women to talk about their experience of domestic violence and policing and so on and so forth. How important do you think it is that those constituencies work together in looking at your report and saying, well, what can we do better together?
So, I mean, I think yes is the answer. I think it's important that the constituent groups work together and trying to find a common voice so that you are heard more loudly. Yeah. So if voices come together, it can be heard in a different way to multiple voices where, you know, you can divide and rule. Yeah. You can listen to one, not listen to the other.
Absolutely.
Say I've met them and they're not important. So I do think a sort of collaboration. And, you know, I think some of the work that Mandu Reid has done for the Women's Equality Party.
Who's speaking, by the way.
Who is fantastically good that she is speaking. I think some of what she has done to bring together sort of the voice of women and our inequality alongside the issue of race and discrimination. So I think that, you know, there are models there to build upon. I suppose the other thing that I just wanted to say, though, to you, just ran through my mind when you asked that question, is I think that what I am saying, Lee, is that the issue of consent and either being at risk across London or broken in some communities is a mainstream issue.
It is indeed.
So I think often even the fact that one uses the expression, it's the formal expression, ethnic minority, is interesting to me.
Given we're a global majority, it is very...
It's global majority and it's actually a very significant...
majority in London.
And it's the fastest growing groups of families across the country, which many people don't realise. And so I think what I would say is, though it's important to, in my humble opinion, it's important to bring that campaign voice together, which is, I think, what you're trying to do next week. I also think that voice has to be set within the majority. Absolutely. Which is the majority of Londoners. Well, the demographic in London is crystal clear. Yeah. It's crystal clear. But I think the profound importance of trust, faith, confidence in consenting for you to police me. So that's what people need to get their heads around.
That's the tipping point.
We consent to being stopped. We consent to being searched. We consent to being arrested. We consent to getting in cars, and we consent to going into a police cell for 24 hours.
And it can only be done by consent.
And we will never have, and we never want, mass use of force and more police officers than we have members of the public.
Yeah.
But it's a model that is built on real respect and collaboration and understanding. Absolutely. And I think some of that has been about austerity. You know, there's no doubt in my mind that the police in London were cut.
Yeah.
Some of it was a mistake. I think the fact we've got 12 basic command units, with some of those covering 4 local authority boroughs in London.
The size of constabularies.
Some of the size of it is bigger than, you know, as I put in the report, bigger than some of the whole police forces outside London. But those people who were responsible for those boroughs, and I don't just mean the communications in those boroughs, I mean the policing of those boroughs, the choices they make around who they stop, who they search, what operations do they put in place. That has to be held much more in the public gaze, and particularly around the borough commanders, or the basic command units commanders.
I think we agree with you on that, and partly what we want to be able to do to help to shape what the policing plan should be for local areas that takes account of that local area specificity, history, geography, culture, and so on and so forth. I think that the response to the report has been interesting. We now got the London Policing Board coming up with the mayor, and that's going to add an additional layer of scrutiny. I remember when we had elected Metropolitan Police Authority, and I remember how effective that was in keeping the spotlight on various issues within the Met. And its abolition, I think, has left a big hole in the democratic police accountability landscape. The London Policing Board is going to fill that. The mayor's going to chair it, which is going to give it, substantial authority. Along with that, there's groups like the APA. How important do you see community groups like the APA working with the London Policing Board and others in restoring and bringing back a policing that is more equitable and less unjust in its operation?
Well, I think it's incredibly important, following on from March, that obviously I'm really clear that the London Policing Board has to have a lot of clout. But in itself and of itself, it will need other organisations to support and help. There's no doubt in my mind that this is a moment for collaboration and for pulling together different communities in different ways. So I think it's of a really good time, as it were, for you to do what it is that you're doing, because they won't be able to do it on their own. No. And I think the other thing that I'm very clear about in the report is that I actually think that Mark Rowley and the new leadership of the Met do want to be more accountable, actually, and do want to open up more, but they will need help to do that. So if we get this right, if we have a more open and more up for being challenged police organisation, we have the London Policing Board chaired by the Met. We've still got MOPAC that does pull together and does great work actually around the data. We wouldn't know, they are better. The survey work they do is better than any other force in the any other PCC in the country. It was a real gift to us to have that. But alongside that, we also need community-based organisations to organise, because you can't have 1,000 voices coming in daily. What you need are some voices coming in that you can listen to that are representative of greater numbers. So I think it's good, and I think it's good timing.
It's a 3-year project, because we don't believe there's instant solutions to this problem. They're long and complex in nature, and they'll be nuanced in solution. So we're going on a 3-year consultation to say to our community, what do you think a 21st century anti-racist policing charter looks like? But we're also answering the question is, what is our community's responsibility for tackling serious violence? We see these two sides of the same coin. We want to reduce the incidence of serious violence, and we want better quality policing. These are not counterposed, but from a community's viewpoint, we need to tackle both simultaneously. Because I think one of the criticisms of the police will be, well, you want to reduce stop and search, let's say, if that was a conclusion communities came to, but yet you're subject to, increased violence. So I think we're going to be very nuanced. It's going to be a long-term project, but, consent decree charters in the absence of consent, policing charters, public health violence reduction charters that focus on what the black community can do to support itself in reducing violence. These are all, and they're mentioned in your report. So we were so delighted when we saw charters in your report. Do you think we're on the right thing? You're convinced about that, are you? That a sort of co-production of policing charters. And I'll tell you why, because in Brixton, we set one course in terms of race equality with the new chief super, and they're here for 18 months, they get their stripes, they're gone, and then comes somebody else and they want to set a new course, and there's no consistency of approach. And so you're completely reinventing race equality action plans, depending on the personality of the chief super. We say that a 5-year charter should be negotiated, regardless of who the super is. That's what we've all agreed to do on a 5-year period. What do you think of that?
Well, I agree with that. I mean, I wish the turnover of chief supers, superintendents on sort of by boroughs and tri-boroughs and the one with 4 was slower. And I think that comes to something else I wanted to mention. But so because of that, but also because actually I think it's important, this isn't about individuals. It's so for stop and search, for example, something has to give. We need.
It cannot
we
go
need
on like that, can it?
We need, and the only way I could think about it is the co-production of a charter, so that people would get together and have it out.
But Louise, that's got to be equitable co-production. Because we can't come to the table
No, you can't.
as unresourced individuals.
But that's why I use the word charter.
Yeah.
Because the methodology around that isn't imposed.
Yeah.
So I was deliberate to use that word.
Right.
And to frame it in the language as well of sort of truth and reconciliation
and I want to come
bringing people together so that people understand. I was saying there has to be an equitable process around that. And my most pressing one would be stop and search.
Yeah.
Where I think we need a reset, a kind of fundamental reset.
Home Secretary is calling for ramping up.
Home Secretary may be calling for ramping up. That's a matter for her.
Your view is that that's not the solution?
I don't think it's the solution.
You spoke about truth and reconciliation, and we've said to the Met, well, it'll be interesting to see your iteration of your new turnaround plan. Does it start with truth and reconciliation? And we're in negotiations with them around that.
Good.
And said to them, truth and reconciliation has to be the starting point. And we've been we're going to think about what that should look like in the context of this. How important do you think that is in pressing the reset button in London?
Well, I think it's
nationally. Let me say nationally, because I know my colleagues in Manchester, I can hear them in my head saying, Lee, it's not all about London. And it isn't. This is what you've described in relation to the Met can be said in various degrees, about other forces throughout the country. But
I think in a way, though I have some views on national policing, and I wouldn't be surprised, certainly on misconduct. I think that many chief police officers got in touch, and I went to one of their NPCCs, National Police Chief Council, during the course of the review. Could have gone twice, but I certainly went once. And there was an acknowledgement on the misconduct work that, and I haven't been back since I published. So what I'm saying is I have a sort of legitimacy to talk about the Met in London because of what I did, and I'm less legit to talk about other areas, but never, sorry, maybe it's because I consider myself a Londoner, but we have a really long history of police discrimination of black people in London that was before Macpherson.
Absolutely.
Now we're in the 30th year of Stephen Lawrence's murder, and I suppose I feel we have to get this right in London.
And truth and reconciliation.
And truth and reconciliation is what people are able to do together. The point of that, and you know, it wasn't just South Africa. If you look at the process that happened in Northern Ireland around the Good Friday Agreement and around bringing, I'm showing my age now, we're both showing our age today. You know, you could see that there was what is the truth of what has happened here and how do we reconcile our differences to enable us to move forward together. To go forward together.
Absolutely.
And I think that is just a really good way of responding to the review, which is to say, let's work out together what we think the picture is. We've got Casey's review. We've got a lot of detail in there. Does it reflect what you think, what other people think in the hall on Wednesday, what people outside think? What do the cops think about that? What do they think about their policing? How do they feel about stop and search? And how can you make the differences? And that's why I put in a flavour of, you know, you have to agree what the truth is, don't you? And if you don't agree together what that truth is, you have to know where the differences are.
Yeah.
So if your picture is, you know, A and somebody else's picture is C, together you have to find a B, and then you can go forward.
Correct.
And consent, the indicators around trust and confidence are so low that it would take something significant to turn it around.
And just let me explore, because I see those as a fundamental threat to our democratic way of life, actually. I see them as cutting to the heart of the issue of citizenship and democracy, and, you know, your rights to be treated as an equal and fair citizen. And that has been fundamentally corroded by, you know, the kind of situation we find at the Metropolitan Police Service in relation to the war. Institutional discrimination, which is bleeding out into all areas, not just race. You bring it together and you see how actually bad practices across the board, essentially. But that truth and reconciliation allows us to have a candid discussion where each owns their mistakes and then decides how we can go forward together. I think it's so essential to the process. I can't see any process that doesn't begin there actually succeeding.
I think that's right. I think the sort of reset, the charter, the sense of a truth and reconciliation process. I mean, running alongside that, I think, and I'm hoping that there will be progress made on this, is I do feel that the actual frontline model of policing in London was just dilapidated. Yeah. You know, I felt really sorry for a lot of those officers in that, you know, they couldn't run response teams to the sort of shift patterns, that people were exhausted. They were on a constant run around, as it were. They didn't have the equipment that they needed. We don't have neighbourhood policing teams anymore in the way
sadly.
That we did. Let's just own that one. There are people called neighbourhood policing officers. Yeah. And, you know, what are they called? Dedicated ward officers, but they are not the same as a sort of pre-2012, 2010 model of a sergeant, 3 police officers and 5 PCSOs in every ward in London.
Ken Livingstone idea with Surrey and Blair, I have to say.
You can't, we've gone from there to
nothing.
Here. And in a way, you know, that's what the new leadership of the Met inherited. You know, that. So I think there's a fundamental thing that I didn't expect to find, which is the actual sort of management and the operation of the Met. It just was all over the shop. Absolutely. You know, the sort of fundamental
supervision,
systems and how you recruit, how you hang on to people, how you resource them to do the jobs they need to do. Do you have enough officers in the right place? And, you know, and the government has to take some responsibility for that, the cut of numbers, and now, of course, we're replacing them, so there's a target to replace them, and that's a good thing. Thank you very much, government, that you've done that. But that will take a lot of time to get the level of experience. So you've got sort of a not fit for purpose organisation that essentially is working in a community that has changed and they haven't recognised that change, running alongside a denial of the issues of cultural sort of incompetence and therefore race discrimination, misogyny and sexism and homophobia. So you've got, for me, those sort of 3 bits that all need to happen at the same time.
In parallel. You know, you say in the report that this is the last chance for saloon for the Metropolitan Police in as many words, and talk about they'll, you know, it will need to be structurally, you know, taken apart or reassembled or whatever. I was always struck by the experience of Andy George in relation to his previous RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and now the Northern Ireland, the Police Service for Northern Ireland, where they had to make a fundamental break. They couldn't carry on with that reputation. It contained too much baggage, historical toxicity, and so on. You really believe they're in their last chance saloon? Because my own view is that they need to be disaggregated. It's a £4 billion a year empire. It's just gone too big. It's got mission drift in all sorts of other areas. It needs to reconsolidate itself, rein back in, have proper police accountability measures. I mean, we say what we say, Louise, but the Met lobbied for the abolition of the Metropolitan Police Authority with Boris Johnson as mayor. You know, the reason he did it is because there was a very strong police lobby that we don't think we need that, and so on. So all of those issues, I think that are very pertinent. But what do you think?
So I'm always guarded if people ask me to do a review to go down the easy route of structural change.
Yeah.
Because to say it all needs to be reconfigured might be a bit of a get out of jail card on culture and on reforming the organisation. Mm-hmm. It's too soon to tell.
Yeah.
So my view is that there's new leadership. They've only been in the job a few months by the time I publish. I think that they have to get the organisation on its feet, better managed, better resourced, and better doing its job properly, like the core function of responding to 999 calls, dealing properly with women who have been raped or sexually assaulted, kids that are being abused. It needs to deal much better with actually, instead of having loads of the territorial support units flying around boroughs in their vans, with nobody knowing what they're doing and completely unaccountable to borough commanders.
That was the PSG 30 years ago.
Tell me, they need to put more emphasis in the day-to-day neighbourhood policing and neighbourhood response, so that more that goes up, the more likely trust in them will go up if they get that right, the less need they should need for these specialist units. I would give them, as I've put in my review, I'd give them 2.5 years. So halfway through their tenure, somebody goes back in, hopefully somebody like me or me, and you go back in and see what progress have you made. So I think they genuinely need time to sort their organisation out. Yeah. They need to accept the culture of the organisation. They need to accept where that's putting them with Londoners, and they need to build that through. And I would rather that they concentrate on that in the next 2 years and give them a fighting chance of us supporting them to do that across all of their tasks, than actually let them off the hook and say, I tell you what you need structural.
You need abolishing,
So that's where I am at the moment.
Okay, all right. But you strike a warning in the report, last chance saloon, and I think that's right in terms of black communities. I think
it's right. I think
it may be
way.
Well, I agree. I've been seeing now the public figures. There is a public deficit, isn't there, in trust and confidence in policing. And with that, Louise Casey, we bring what has been a fascinating interview to a close. We're delighted that you could come and join us. I think we've had a really thorough exploration of some of your issues. We'll be seeing you again at some point in September. We might ask you to speak at our youth conference, young people there, because I think they would benefit enormously from hearing some of your views and insights. But thank you very much. Louise Casey.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Lee.
No worries.